Okay, well, Rocky and I are still being lazy boneses. We are. There's Rocky. I'm gonna scratch my nose here. It's itchy. There's Rocky. He's being a lazy bones. Hey, I'm being a lazy bones too. I'm still in bed. Mm-hmm. We're both lazy bones. We are. We're both lazy as Jed's old coon dog. You. You're funny. You're a sweetheart. It's true. You're a sweetheart. Yeah. There you are, eh? Yeah. Anyway, it's a funny thing. I was just talking to somebody about on the messenger there or whatever about a character from my hometown of Perth. He lived there for quite a few years until he passed away. A fellow by the name of Ron Beacock. Anyway, the first time I ever saw Ron Beacock, they were living on Wilson Street East in Perth, just about a block from my grandparents' place. I was 14 years old. And every day at lunchtime, because I used to go to my grandparents at lunchtime, and I'd have to walk past their house. And every day at lunchtime, when I'd walk past there, Ron would open up the door and sick this little dog on me. And the dog would come running out onto the street, yapping, and it would nip at my legs and bite me and my ankles and stuff. And it tore my pants, and it drew blood from my legs more than once. Sunk its teeth right into my legs, And Ron would stand there and laugh his head off. He thought that was the funniest thing. Anyway, one day I was fed up. I was tired of it. And I wound up and I give the dog a kick when the dog come after me. I just punted it like a football, basically. And the dog rolled to the other side of the street, actually rolled. And it was just laying there. It wasn't moving. And I just kept walking anyway. And never saw the dog again. I think I probably knocked the dog out. I don't really think I killed it, but I think I probably just knocked it out or something. But he never opened the door and let the dog out again when I was going past there. He thought it was great fun to sick the dog on me and have it bite me and stuff. Anyway, that was that was one incident. And then years later, in 1990, when I was driving a taxi cab, Ron came to work driving a taxi cab. He also, I guess, drove a school bus for a while, which is kind of scary. But anyway, driving a taxi cab, the same company I worked for, a company that's now gone. It's been out of business for decades. It was called VACAB. THECAB, VACAB. Call VACAB, Anyway, Ron came to work with us, and he didn't work with us for a long time or anything, though, only for a few weeks. But there was an elderly woman I used to pick up every day and take to the chiropractic clinic. And this woman could barely walk, and she was all bent over. She could hardly move. Anyway, I'd pull into her driveway, and I'd get out of the car, and I'd meet her at her front door, and I'd walk with her, she could hold on to my arm or whatever. I'd walk her to the car. I had always opened the car door. I'd always open the car door, and then I'd go around, open the car door, and then I'd meet her in front of her house, and I'd walk her to the car. And I'd get her into the car, make sure she was comfortable, and then I would drive her over to the chiropractic clinic. And this was a crazy thing, because this chiropractic clinic had a whole bunch of steps. Seems funny looking back on it now, but that was not accessible to people who were crippled up at all, really. It's kind of funny looking back on it, but I used to get her out of the car, and I'd help her up all the steps and into the clinic, get her seated in the waiting room, and then I would go to the desk there, and I'd tell the nurse that Mrs. So-and-so was there for her appointment, and so on like that. Then I'd leave her there, and when she was ready to have me come pick her up, she'd have them call us, and I'd come get her. Well, one day, I go to Smiths Falls on a run, and so I wasn't available when the lady needed to go to the chiropractic clinic. So they sent Ron over to pick her up. And on my way back from Smiths Falls, the dispatcher gets on the radio and was paging me. I drove most of the time. I drove car 104, which was the 1984 Buick LeSabre, big blue Buick LeSabre sedan that I drove. Anyway, so the dispatcher, he gets on there. He says, "Car 104, what's your 1020?" Which means, where are you? And I told him I was just leaving Smiths Falls, heading back to Perth, and I should be back in Perth in about 20 minutes. And he says, "Well, when you get back, can you go over to the chiropractic clinic and pick up Mrs. So-and-so? She won't deal with anybody but you." He said, "Ron threw an awful scare into her, and she's afraid to deal with anybody but you." So I said, "Yeah, no problem. I'll go get her, you know." And so when I got back to Perth, I went straight over there and picked the lady up. And in the car, she told me what had happened. Ron had pulled into her driveway, and he sat in the car. He sat in the car, and he roared out the window at her. The woman could hardly move. It took her forever to get anywhere, because she was so badly crippled up. That'd be why she was going to the chiropractor, Okay, Rocky, you got to get off me again. He's standing on my throat. Okay, now. Anyway, Ron was roaring out the window at her, telling her to hurry up, calling her an effing old bitch, telling her she was costing him money because he was losing runs waiting for her to get in the car. Couldn't be bothered to get out of the car to help her. The whole way over to the chiropractic clinic, he berated her for taking so long to get from her front door to the car and to get into the car. He did nothing to help her. When she got to the chiropractic clinic, again, he would not help her. She had to navigate all those stairs, all those steps outside. She had to navigate all those steps outside on her own, which was actually kind of dangerous. You'd have to see the way this place was set up to know it certainly was not set up for people who were crippled up at all, Anyway, so she told me all that anyway, and so after that, I made a point of, around the time I'd need to pick her up, I made a point to be available, not to be on any other runs or anything, I felt terrible for the woman. She's long dead now. She died decades ago. Like, this is going back now, 35 years, and she was an elderly lady then. But this is how Ron was anyway, There was one time where he was living he was living across the road from this was after they moved from Wilson Street. He was living across the road from a farm, and the town ended up buying the farm, the town of Perth did, because the town dump bordered the farm, and the town dump had contaminated the farm. I knew the family that lived there, actually, the Daru family. And the town dump had made the farm that you couldn't farm there anymore. It just contaminated it. And so, now this was an old family farm going back generations, and they ended up, their cows were dying because their cows were drinking water that was contaminated and stuff. It wasn't, you couldn't farm there. It was really bad. It was all this runoff from the Perth dump that caused that. Anyway, so the town bought the property from the Daru family, and they were using it as a snow dump in the wintertime, like when they would clear all the snowbanks away in town, plow all the snow and clear the snowbanks. They would bring dump truck loads of snow out there, and they do this all night long, and they dump it in the fields there of the old Daru farm. Anyway, Ron, he wrote a letter to the Perth Courier, which is our local paper in Perth, and it started open with, he woke up with cannon fire in his front yard. Well, that piqued my interest because I knew Ron, and I knew Ron was a son of a bitch. And I thought, I wondered, did somebody, set off an improvised explosive in front of his house or something? I could see that happening because he was such a mean outfit, I could see somebody doing something like that. So it kind of piqued my interest. So I read the letter because I knew him. I recognized the name at the bottom of it, and I thought, oh boy, what's this? Anyway, it turns out what he was talking about was all the banging from the dump trucks. And he said that if the town of Perth continued to do that, to engage in this behavior of setting off cannon fire in his front yard and disturbing his sleep, that he would go across the road with his shotgun and he would take care of it. Wouldn't be happening anymore when he got finished. So anyway, how he managed not to get arrested for that, I don't know. But anyway, threatening to shoot members of the public works crew. Anyway, that's another story anyway. I actually knew the property owners that lived, the property owners that had the business next to his house. They still have the business there. It's actually where I go to get my drinking water. It's a feed store for the local farmers and whatnot. And it's called Dodds and Irwin. And the Irwin brothers still run it. Elmer Dodds is no longer involved with it, but the Irwin brothers are running it. Elmer Dodds and the Irwin brothers' father were the founders, I think. But I knew Elmer Dodds too. He was a neighbor of ours in Smiths Falls years ago, but that's how it got the name Dodds and Irwin. Anyway, the Irwin brothers are still running it, the sons of one of the founders. And I know those people, and I get along well with them. Anyway, there was a field of wild strawberries. The field is pretty much gone now, but at that time there was still a field there in front of the store. And there were all kinds of wild strawberries in it. And I went out there to pick the strawberries. And I could hear voices from over at Ron's house. And I remember I heard laughter. There were people laughing over there and stuff. And I thought to myself, boy, that's unusual. I said, I thought to myself, I'm surprised. I didn't think Ron would allow anybody to laugh at his house, you know. I was surprised. He didn't seem like the type that would allow laughter to take place at his house. Anyway, I didn't know what to think of it, but I just kept picking my berries. Well, the next thing you know, I look up and he's standing over me, glaring at me. Now, this was not his property. This property belonged to the feed store, to the Irwin brothers. But anyway, he's standing over me, glaring at me. And so, of course, I get up on my feet. And he tells me, he says, I've been hired by this business as security for this property. And he said, you have been causing trouble here, and you are not welcome here. He said, get into your car and leave now. And I just looked at him. I said, well, what are you talking about, causing trouble here? He said, I told you you're causing trouble here. Get into your car and leave now. Well, I got in the car and I left. I thought, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to find out. So the next day I went to see one of the Irwin brothers, and I told him the story. And he said, no, he said, that's not true. None of that is true. He's not security for our property. We never asked him to be security for our property, and we certainly didn't hire him to be security for our property. Rocky there, Rocky. And he said, so that's not true. And he said, no, he said, you're not causing trouble around our property, Tom. That's not true either. And he said, you're welcome out. You're welcome out there anytime. He said, and if you want to pick the strawberries, pick the strawberries. He said, don't worry about it. And he said, next time I see him, I'm going to take this up with him. He had no business doing that, you know. So that was one incident. Yeah, there were all kinds. Anyway, a friend of mine, good friend of mine from way back, actually the same person who bought me my power bank that I'm using now. This friend of mine, when he lived in Perth, he was married, and his wife had a son from a previous marriage who was a teenager at the time. So my friend Terry was raising his stepson, Joel. And Joel didn't have very many friends or anything. Joel was kind of awkward and, just didn't have a lot of friends and so on. But he befriended Ron Beacock's son. They were the same age. Anyway, so, Terry thought this is good. The boy has a friend. Hey, this is all right. It's good for him to have a friend. So he was good with it at first. But then Joel started telling stories about how this lad would do things like he'd open up a random car door, parked car somewhere, and he'd haul out and take a leak on the people's seats. Take a leak on somebody's seat in their car or whatever. Just open the door and pee in there and stuff. And Joel was telling Terry these stories. And I think Joel thought it was kind of funny. He'd make him laugh doing this stuff, But anyway, Terry told him, he said, you can't be friends with that guy anymore. Because he said, what's going to happen is at some point he's going to get caught doing this crazy stuff, taking a leak on somebody's seat or whatever. And he's going to take off. He's going to hightail it out there, and he's going to leave you standing there, and you're going to take the beating for it. So he said, you can't associate with him anymore. And he made him call the Beacock lad up and tell him that he couldn't associate with him anymore. Couldn't be his friend anymore. Well, then the Beacock lad started making threats against Joel. He was going to beat him up. If he saw him anywhere, he was going to beat him up for ending the friendship and all that. Anyway, another story about these people. Maybe I shouldn't talk about these people, but I'm going to, because I don't care. But another story about these people, that the wife there, Ron's wife, Sandra, she worked at Walmart in Smiths Falls for a while. And one day I was in there. I was going for the checkout. And, we have these reusable bags now because the government has pretty much banned plastic shopping bags here. Anyway, she had loaded up one of my shopping bags with my goods. And I reached over to pick it up to put it in my cart. And she slapped my hand. And very harshly she said, "No, thank you, sir." I still don't know what that was about, but she gave my hand a pretty good smack. Anyway, I just looked at her and I told her, I said, you better never hit me again. I said, that was a mistake you made there. You better never do that again. And then I picked up the bag and I put it in the cart. But yeah, this is, this is the stuff anyway that, yeah. Anyway, there are quite a few people around Perth like that, actually. At least these people weren't the only ones. I had trouble fitting in there because of a lot of stuff like that. Really, I couldn't deal with that, Not everybody in Perth is like that, mind you. There's people who are perfectly sane and sensible and easy to deal with too, but Perth seems to have a disproportionate number of them that aren't anyway. But a side note to the story about the little dog, too, that Ron was sicking on me every day back in 1982. One of my classmates used to get sent up there for lunch every day. Ron's wife used to feed this classmate. I guess that her parents weren't able to have her come home for lunch, so they hired Sandra Beacock to feed this girl lunch every day. So she'd have to go up there anyway for a hot lunch every day. Ron had been in the military, and this girl's father was also in the military. And after that happened, she took me aside, and she never told me what happened with the dog. I assumed that I had hurt the dog because the dog, when I kicked it, it rolled to the other side of the street and it just laid there and didn't move. So I assumed that I had hurt the dog. But anyway, apparently Ron was making threats, I guess, or whatever, that he was going to do various things to me because I had kicked his dog. Now, she never told me if the dog was alive or dead or how much damage I'd done to the dog or anything else. I know I did some damage to the dog, but the dog was being sent out every day to bite me for his entertainment. So, I'm not normally cruel to animals, but in a situation like that, it's a little different. I figure the same rules don't apply. Anyway, yeah, it was wild though. I mean, I had my pants torn, I had blood drawn and everything else. Like, the dog was a vicious little bugger. And it wasn't really small. It wasn't a big dog. And thank God it wasn't, but it also wasn't really tiny either. It was a small dog though. It was a smaller dog. And I remember it had shaggy white fur. And it would stand probably 1.5 to 2 feet tall. So it wasn't the tiniest of dogs, but it was, and it had a good bite on it, I'll tell you, too. It'd get a hold of me, get a hold of my leg, biting on my legs or whatever, Like I say, I had pants ruined by it. I did actually get bit more than once. This happened every day for a few weeks before I finally got fed up and just give the dog a good roundhouse kick, But anyway, I normally wouldn't have done that, though. But under the circumstances, I can't say I feel bad about it, really. even if I should. I really don't. But anyway, that girl warned me that Ron was making threats against me, I guess, because I'd put the boots to his dog. But anyway, this is the stuff that goes on. It's a dangerous world, I guess. But I've known all kinds of characters like that over the years, you know. And yeah, I could write several books, I'll tell you. I could write a volume of books of the bad characters that I knew, like Ron, and I could write a volume of books about the good characters that I knew as well, you know, but who were also characters like Jim McCann, for example, Jimmy McCann, that had the fields and acres of old cars in the fields behind his house and stuff, you know. He was a pretty good guy. I miss him. I do. I was a friend of his, and I miss him. You know, he's long gone now. He died years ago. But anyway, the thing is, another story about Ron Beacock. He was in charge of entertainment at the Perth Legion branch. And he resigned eventually because he said that everything he suggested, he was told, was either immoral or illegal. Well, I was friends with a couple that belonged to the Legion in Perth, and they told me the story. The things that Ron wanted to bring to the Legion for entertainment were cockfights, dog fights. He wanted to bring a striptease dancer in one time. That was another thing he wanted to do. You know, all stuff that really, well, I mean, cockfights and dog fights are illegal, for one thing. And not only that, but they're nasty. You know, these are blood sports involving animals. They're nasty. And, you know, bringing a stripper in, again, it's the Legion, for God's sakes, you know. It's not a den of iniquity, it's the Legion. I mean, you know, this is a veterans organization. Like, you know, it's not Fifi's Roadhouse or something. It's a friggin' veterans organization. Anyway, yeah, so that's why he resigned, because everything he wanted to do, they told him was either illegal or immoral. Well, they were right. It all was illegal, illegal or immoral. Some of it was both. But anyway, oh, you know, I could write books about all this stuff, but people wouldn't believe me. Like, they really would. If I, just the people I've known in this life, you know, if I just wrote about the people I've known in this life, you know, and some of the crazy people I've known, I honestly, you know, I've been told I should write a book, but I don't think I ever will, because I just don't want to be called a liar as often as I would be if I wrote a book, because most people would never believe it. But yeah, I've known some pretty crazy characters. Anyway, that's just one of them. In fact, the whole family was, you know. Anyway, that's it. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye for now.